Let's get into it with my next guest. Joining me now is former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the program tonight. First of all, I have to ask, what did you make of Biden's trip to Israel?
Well, look, I think that he can give a good speech. He can show up. I give him credit for doing that. But I think we forget sometimes the policies that led up to this. It's American weakness that has empowered and emboldened Hamas to fire off rockets like this. It's the weakness that has allowed Russia to invade Ukraine. It is that weakness that has emboldened Iran, that funds Hamas. I mean, remember, this administration has been dying to get them back into the JCPOA. They had already committed to giving them or unlocking $6 billion. They somehow are shocked by the fact that people are taking advantage of this weakness. And that's the problem I have. The speeches are great. The events are great, but it's the policies that led up to it that are the problem.
And meanwhile, now let's move back closer to Washington here and talk us through, because I think a lot of people here in Australia are looking at the headlines out of America and the Capitol and the Speaker's fight and don't quite understand what's happening here. Now we've got Jim Jordan making a push for a vote, confronting steep opposition. Talk us through this, and frankly, how much does not having a speaker in the chair matter to the Republicans?
Well, for the first part, I would just say I don't think it's just people in Australia that don't get it. I think there's a lot of us in America that are trying to figure out what's happening. I joked last weekend that if we're not careful, we're going to end up with that George Santos, that congressman from New York that has quite a checkered past. If the speaker, obviously, I'm kidding, but the reality is that 98% of the conference was on board with maintaining Kevin McCarthy as speaker. You had just that handful of 8 Republicans that ousted him. And the problem is you need 98% to get to 217. So Republicans hold a 221 seat majority. You need 217 of that 221 to find a consensus candidate. And right now, nobody is getting there. I don't think that this current play, which is to empower the Speaker pro tem, which is the Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, to assume temporary duties, that's not going to pass, in my estimation. And so we're back to the drawing board. I think Republicans are going to have to keep going at this, maybe 1, maybe 2 more times. I think there are a couple candidates that will emerge. The more you don't want this job, the more likely you are to end up with it. It's sort of the way I look at this right now. So I think that we're going to see a little bit longer. And then to the last part of your question, I think for right now, we're okay. Look, the Senate was out last week, so nothing was going to get done anyway. But once you get into that job, there's a learning curve. And I think that we can probably go another couple days, but if we go another week, this is really going to start to get messy. And remember, the U.S. government is on a ticking time bomb for when we'll run out of authority to spend again. And we will shut down the government in less than 30 days now.
And, I mean, this is the question then that comes next, is obviously if you don't have somebody there to pass those motions to get the money coming through, and you've got the United States in a potential war going on in the Middle East, is that going to wind up being then blamed on Republicans? Almost every government shutdown, as long as I've been alive, winds up being blamed on Republicans. Is there going to be a bigger blowback for the party when it doesn't really need that kind of thing in terms of the global crisis that's going on?
Well, you're absolutely right. With the exception of that one that Schumer blew during the Trump administration, I think every shutdown in my lifetime, as you noted, has been blamed on Republicans. The messaging just doesn't come out well. So if they don't have, if the House Republicans don't have a speaker, it makes the blame a lot easier to point in their direction. So they got to get their act together. And then the irony, by the way, is that the most likely scenario is to pass at least another short-term continuing resolution, which is exactly what they were all opposed to in the first place. So I think the question is going to be about timing. How soon can they get their act together? How soon can they start funding the government? What does the situation in Israel look like? There's a lot of variables, but the quicker they can get their act together and start focusing on the priorities at hand, i.e. funding a government and getting some of these things done, the better. The longer that looms, I think we start entering into dangerous territory.
Yeah, and I think that chaos starts to embolden a lot of America's enemies, too, who look and say, these guys don't have their act together. We can do whatever we like.
I think I would beg to differ a little on that.
Sure.
Look, just because the House of Representatives doesn't have a speaker, you saw President Biden. The U.S. government can act. There's plenty of money there already. We can support our allies. We can fund them. We can send things. Does it help in the long run? No. Does it look good? No. But I think in the short term, I think our allies know that we've got their backs.
Good, good, good. But now, finally, before I let you go, I got to ask you about this here, because this really, I think, is a very curious story here. But the federal judge overseeing the election subversion case against Donald Trump issuing a gag order against the former president, restricting his ability, well, they say, to target, people involved with the case, but it sounds like it's a fair bit more than that. And Sean, I think it has a real dangerous precedent here to be having defendants being told essentially they can't talk about their case. It seems like a violation of the First Amendment and, the sort of the ideas of due process that America was founded on. Or am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I had famed constitutional lawyer Alan Dershowitz on my podcast, The Sean Spicer Show, and I asked him the exact same question and came at it from the exact same angle that you are, which is, how does this work? Where's that line between free speech that we're guaranteed under our First Amendment and this? He came down squarely on the side of the First Amendment. And I think that the Trump campaign and the Trump team is going to appeal this decision and likely win, because the line between criticizing somebody and your First Amendment rights is so small. I have a feeling that this will go up the chain, if you will, in the judicial process, and ultimately the president's First Amendment rights will prevail.
Yeah, Sean Spicer, thank you so much. I've always said you don't have to love Trump to not like a lot of what they're trying to do to get him. Thank you so much.
That's absolutely right.
Absolutely right. And check out the podcast, the Sean Spicer podcast. Thank you so much for your time.